Digital Foundry made an entire video about the performance and they actually did some fancy benchmarks, and I am very curious about what they said because they use 8GB cards. I said in my building PC video that I thought 8GB 3080 was the best possible value in the second-hand market right now, and he seems to disagree. I got tagged by people on Discord telling me that a 3080 was not the right choice and like something with 12GB was more like what you needed. So let's take a look at it.
Monster Hunter Wilds is a game on PC where I am genuinely confused at the performance for the visual quality that I am seeing on screen. This is true on a high-spec PC, but it is crucially the case on a lower
He's on a 4070, so the 4070, if I recall correctly, the base one is 8GB. Just so like the 3060 for some reason has 12 gigs, and even today with like the 5070 is still on 12 gigs. Like Nvidia is screwing everybody out of VRAM for no reason, and some games like Monster Hunter really need that VRAM.
Contact. I genuinely cannot advise buying this game if you're on a lower end GPU or a GPU with 8GB of VRAM. Surface level impressions though when loading up the game for the first time seemed positive. There is a long shader pre-compilation step which took around 6 minutes on a 9800 X3D and more than 13 minutes on a Ryzen 5 3600. I had a similar positive impression when looking in the graphical menu. I saw a lot of options here to control things in a fine-grained way with a VRAM meter, preview images for a number of the options, and even little pip which tell you which aspect of your PC is most affected by the option in question.
I hope CPU, that becomes a standard right there. I hope this becomes like a thing in every game.
Those things seemed nice on the surface, but another surface level thing gave me pause when I launched the game. On the first start, the game insists that you turn on frame generation before it even starts with this pop-up. This is the case
twice.
Even though the developers
they
have
ask
no
you twice
clue about your performance level that you can actually muster in the game. As a reminder, Nvidia or AMD would never advise you to use frame generation with low base frame rates like 30 FPS, as it usually produces poor experiences. Yet this pop-up there shows that the developers are saying turn it on regardless of actual performance. That is definitely bad design. If you click no here, the game further insists that you can turn it on in the options menu.
Like this is one of those things, Capcom, okay? Like Capcom, I'm gonna teach you a lesson in how to deal with marketing. Say that you wanna grift and you wanna say that frame generation is 60 FPS, because that's a lie, but say it, okay? Just enable it by default. Like, do you have any idea how stupid, how desperate it looks? Like you open the game and the very first thing you get is that they ask you not once but twice to enable frame generation off the bat. Like just think about like the first impression it leaves you. Like it kind of sets you up to expect the performance is gonna suck just because of that prompt. Like all you have to do is enable it by default, no question, and then people go over there and disable it or something. That's what I would do. I don't know. Or maybe just ask you once and that's it. You know, like 2 prompts on frame generation. People hate it when they get pushed by the UI. You know, it feels like every day they are trying to make UI on Windows or on games like as hostile as possible. This is awful. It's like the cutscenes. Like, you know how like some cutscenes in the game are skippable and some cutscenes are not, and then you got like that rail shooter thing that is transparently made to waste your time in the campaign so you don't beat the game in 5 hours, and you gotta sit there on your sacred doing nothing while they talk about things you don't care about and you cannot keep it. I just hate this hostility on the design of the game, man. Come on.
Whatever their intent is here, to me as a tech reviewer, this insistence paints a poor potential picture for the game's base performance. After all the pop-ups, I played like any other casual
Look at those
user,
spikes.
and I used the game's default settings that it detected and set DLSS to balanced mode at 1440p on an RTX 4060 and started my adventure. I immediately could tell though that something was just not right. Without even mentioning performance, I could see that the textures in the game were confusingly poor. So many shots had textures like this that were just bafflingly low resolution.
Let me look up something, okay? Okay, so Morrowind, Elder Scrolls 3 came out in 2002. This is a texture in Morrowind, okay? Compare that right there. This, like fabric, that's why I chose this texture, is like cloth, right? And this game is literally lower resolution than a 2002 game. This is much worse. I do not recall a PlayStation 3 game looking like Minecraft.
Almost looks PS3 level here. And some of the textures,
that's
like this
way too
character's
generous.
coat, even though it's directly in front of the camera, look straight up wrong. I presume the coat here is supposed to be white color, but the poorly configured texture compression maybe has made it into a multicolored one with
that
obvious
looks like a
mosaic
JPEG
artifacting.
artifact.
When I finally got character control after the long-winded intro, I was greeted by big stutters each and every time I turned the camera while using the RTX 4060 at the default high settings at 1440p DLSS balance mode. Along with the stutters, it is quite easy to see how textures were taking a while to load in after each camera turn. So it looked bad and ran bad on the default high settings with no ray tracing on. As a reminder, these are the settings that the game defaulted to after detecting my hardware. Having tested PC games for so long, I know such strange frame time behavior when turning the camera can often have to do with aspects of
those are
streaming
violent
things into
right
VRAM.
there. That one was a violent
stutter. Streaming things into VRAM.
Like,
sometimes
which one is
textures. With that learned experience in mind, I went
You
into
can
the menu
feel that
to tweak
one.
things down when I saw
that's
another
bad.
thing which gave me pause
What
again.
graphics
With
card
that
was
learned
that?
experience in
He's
mind,
on a
I went
4060, once again, like 8 gigabytes of VRAM. One generation ahead of the 3060, and it's a literal downgrade. It's crazy how much Nvidia is screwing people over.
to the menu to tweak things down when I saw another thing which gave me pause again. The game's high textures, which look poor as I just showed, are definitely not the highest at least. The highest require a separate DLC download that will come out when the game is released on release day. So at least there is a potentially better visual experience for those with more GPU memory. The issue with this though is that looking in the menu at this VRAM meter here, it wasn't showing me any sort of warning or telling me that VRAM was in fact an issue. It was showing everything healthily below the yellow and red bars. So the VRAM meter and the game itself thinks everything should be fine at the settings it defaulted to. Yeah, just moving the camera is causing.
Okay, you remember my initial benchmarks in the beta before they made it so overclocking crashes the game? Where I overclocked my VRAM and it started running better? Like, I don't think it's just the capacity as a problem. Like, obviously capacity in the VRAM will help. But like, the problem is obviously that it loads too slowly.
Big stutters, and the textures are very poor, with obvious pop-in. The high textures in Monster Hunter Wilds don't just look poor because I was playing the game on an 8GB GPU. Even loading up the game on an RTX 4070 with 12GB of VRAM shows that the high textures are just the same. They're just poor looking overall. All the quality issues are there that I saw on an RTX 4060 with 8GB. Still, I'm a performance reviewer, so I know what I am
Look
doing.
at that artifact,
Tweaking down the
man.
texture settings to medium got rid of the stutters while turning the camera on the RTX 4060 at least. But that revealed two other big issues with the game's technical quality. One was that the medium textures are just awful anywhere you look. To avoid stuttering on an 8GB GPU, you have to essentially downgrade textures to look more like something you'd see in a game from the early 2000s. Seriously, just look at these textures. I'm kind of at awe that this is the texture quality required to make an 8GB GPU not stutter in what is essentially an empty desert filled with repeating tiled textures for sand. The other
Okay, you wanna hear something crazy? You wanna hear something absolutely crazy? Okay, 8 gigabytes is not enough apparently. Okay, hear this. The PlayStation 3 had 256 megabytes of VRAM, and the textures look better. 256. That's what, a quarter out of an 8? 32 times more VRAM, and it's not enough to run this game. Isn't that crazy? And the textures do not even look better than a PS3 game. Like, what are they doing?
The thing that I saw here at medium texture quality was performance related. Although the game was no longer stuttering when I turned the camera, it was obvious to see that it was heavily dipping in frame rate, and frame times were rapidly increasing just while turning the camera. Having tested many games before, I know to label this as an issue and not expected behavior. Here we are in an empty desert with barely anything, yet just turning the camera is causing quite intense, rapid variations in frame time, and it's making a sinusoidal frame rate graph. Usually
It's
that's a
literally
problem.
empty desert.
With VRR, it looks like the game is slowing down when the camera turns each time. Here's where I discovered something unique. Slowly panning the camera creates a very different performance experience, even though you're looking at the exact same things. With the camera moving slowly, frame times are normalized. The frame rate graph is not showing that sinusoidal behavior, even over an extended period of time. If I were to overlay the average frame time of slowly turning the camera, represented by a red line here on the bottom right frame time graph while moving the camera quickly, you can see that turning the camera at a faster speed produces excessively long frame times that go below that line. So for some reason, when turning the camera quicker, the game runs quite a lot worse. Having diagnosed things like this before, sometimes this can mean an occlusion culling issue with slower CPUs. But that is not the case here, as I'm testing the game on a Ryzen 7 9800X3D, the fastest CPU on the market for gaming.
So basically occlusion means that when you're not looking at something in the game doesn't load it, right? That's what occlusion means, basically, which is a CPU part. But I think the spiky behavior here is something, they designed this game to be played on controller, right? As far as I could test, there is no difference in performance playing on controller or mouse, by the way. But if most people are going to be playing on controller, why isn't occlusion taking your movement on the stick? Like when you hold left, right? Like the game knows at what speed you're going to be turning left because it's on the stick. The engine is not preemptively loading the things that it knows you're going to be looking at in like the next couple frames when you turn. Granted, that's not a feature in most engines, but if loading textures is such a problem in this game, I think they should do something more like that. It is absolutely an occlusion issue in some way.
The other time I've seen an issue like this before is when a game does something less than optimal when streaming things onto the GPU. And in Monster Hunter, this seems especially problematic, as even when using the patently hideous low texture setting, this issue still remains. Textures are blown up pixelated messes, yet something streaming related is causing the GPU to dip here extremely just while moving the camera. And I'm not even turning the camera particularly fast here with heightened sensitivity. This is normal camera turning. Perhaps the issue is the RTX 4060 here. Not really. Even on an RTX 4070, we see similar behavior, just lessened in absolute numbers due to having more GPU grunt.
You know, but the fluctuation is even more violent. It's 20 FPS on the down. Like imagine turning the camera and you lose 20 FPS, man.
Sinusoidal frame rate graph when turning the camera, and frame times that increase in a strange way. Here's where I have to start theorizing. It's not the CPU, and it's somehow related to the GPU. I cannot be 100% positive as to why this is occurring, but if I were to hazard a guess, I think I'm seeing behavior related to direct storage decompression. Going into the game files, one can find direct storage DLLs, which make me think the following is happening. As we can see here with the texture set to low in the menu, there's a lot of VRAM headroom free even on an 8GB GPU. The in-game VRAM meter says that, and measurements from other programs like CapFrameX or RTSS confirm this. In spite of that large amount of VRAM headroom, the game for some reason is potentially still streaming things in and maybe decompressing the textures in an unnecessarily aggressive manner just by doing simple things like turning the camera. And maybe that GPU compute load is too much for GPUs like the RTX 4060, which shows then wild swings in performance when just turning the camera. But it is more reasonable on a larger GPU like the RTX 4070, which has a lot more compute, and that happens to show less frame time variance while doing this. That is just a theory, of course, and I can't prove it at the moment, but the measured behavior is the most important thing. Any lower end GPU like the RTX 4060 will have this extreme performance dipping when just moving the camera around. As a result, I cannot recommend playing this game on GPUs of a similar compute level to this one unless you're fine with these big swings in performance for doing something so basic. I measured the same issue on an RTX 2070 Super. I measured the same issue on an AMD RX 5700, and I would say it probably happens on an Intel GPU, but I found that the ARC A770 in this game ran it really poorly. It was around 20 FPS at similar settings as I was testing the other GPUs on. And we know something is obviously not right with the game's texture streaming, as on the ARC
Look at the
A770,
motion blur.
textures were just not loading in there at all. So something ain't right. Beyond the performance, I currently cannot recommend playing this game to anyone as well with an 8GB GPU, even if it's a bit stronger, like a RTX 3070, as the default high textures are extremely questionable, and the medium textures required to prevent stuttering on an 8GB GPU are just laughable in quality. For higher end GPUs, I also advise caution. When attempting to play the intro of this game on the RTX 4070, it was easy to see stuttering that just happened anytime I played that intro, and the
Every
game
time
was
you
still
move
using
the
these
camera.
poor-looking high textures.
Oh no,
With
it's
the
not even
very
that.
high
It
texture
just
pack that will
happens.
come out at launch as DLC, the game could potentially run even worse due to this streaming behavior I think I'm measuring. As evidenced by the game's released benchmark, using the highest texture setting in that benchmark adds in many measurable frame time hitches into the game that are just not there with the high setting. Based upon my measurements, I believe that the added in stutters are not coming from running out of VRAM. Rather, they're potentially related to the constant streaming in of textures with their real-time decompression occurring. This doesn't sound great, but like The Last of Us Part 2 at launch or
Conspiracy theory, like the reason that he turns so slowly here, you would think, oh, it's a cinematic view in the benchmark, that's why he does a sweep slowly of the landscape. They knew that if you turn the camera any faster, it would cause like a bunch of lag and that people would not buy the game on the benchmark. You know, why is the benchmark like 60% cutscenes? That's just gaslighting, man.
Forspoken at launch, I find this game's basic performance, even in its sparse, last-generation looking world, extremely questionable. I have no idea why an arid desert with nothing in it is running like this. A lot of games that look better run a lot better. As a result, on a technical level, I disrecommend playing this game on a lower-end GPU until it is patched, as I cannot derive optimized settings at the moment without serious concessions to visual quality that just don't make sense. On a higher-end GPU, you'll be able to brute force this game's shortcomings to a degree, but I don't think that is praiseworthy. Anyway, that is all I have to say here.
That's just crazy, man. Well, if you are not very happy about the whole Nvidia AMD situation or how they jack up the prices of the cards, I think DLSS, ironically, even though I think it is an amazing tool, okay, I actually believe that DLSS is one of the most interesting technologies that came out in a long time. It is actually really freaking close to sorcery, but look at like the damage DLSS done. In a world before DLSS existed, this game wouldn't ship. DLSS allowed a game in this state to ship. There was an interview with the Kingdom Come Deliverance people when they were making KCD 2 that the game was basically finished because yes, Monster Hunter Wilds is essentially finished. The content is all there, the combat is all there, the game is done. KCD 2 spent like 6 months, I think they said, just optimizing the game. Granted, that's probably like 30 million if they extended the development in Capcom for 6 months. And Capcom calculated that developing for 6 more months was not worth the amount of money they would get from getting more sales by optimizing the game. And I don't know what to tell you if they are regretting that or not. The most hype game of the year is at 53%, so I don't know if it affected sales negatively too much. I think it did, because one thing is that people review a game and they say like, oh, this game has political things I don't like, or oh, the writing is trash. Like, those are very subjective things that people don't care about. But like, when you look at the reviews of this game, they are all like, this game runs on 20 FPS. I think a lot of people, like they actually say, like I saw a lot of reviews, I got a 4070 and the game runs terrible. Like how many people with a 4070 look at those reviews and they think, well, if that guy cannot run the game, I am not gonna run the game, like I am not gonna bother. I think it did affect sales. I think Capcom really miscalculated how much the bad performance was gonna matter, and I think they are paying the price for it. On the other side, I also think that if they waited 6 months, they would have released on top of GTA 6, and that would have definitely killed the game. So if I'm putting myself on Capcom's shoes, they probably did the best thing they could have done, even though I'm still pretty freaking mad, and they better spend time now optimizing the freaking game. They better patch it really quick. Ooh, there was a patch today. We're gonna be talking about that later, I guess. But yes, Digital Foundry, amazing channel. You should absolutely check it out. We're gonna leave a link in the description, of course. They make a lot of benchmarks. I really like what they do. They actually know how the games work, which is something you're not gonna find on this channel. They actually know really, really interesting stuff. They break down like some of the Unreal Engine problems and stuff. Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.